Hey guys, tonight we're heading into the heat, the dry, sand-whipped kind. Imagine yourself standing in the middle of a Persian desert, sometime around 500 BCE. The sun has been hammering the earth all day long. The air smells like baked clay, and there isn't a leaf in sight that hasn't turned brittle. Your shoes are half melted, your throat is dry, and even the breeze feels like it's been heated in a brick oven. And then, someone hands you a bowl of ice. Real, honest-to-Zeus ice. You stare at it, blinking slowly. Are you hallucinating? Is this a mirage? The bowl is cool in your palms. Tiny beads of condensation trickle down the side like little miracles. You take a hesitant touch, and yes, that's actual frost. Now, your modern brain starts trying to work out the scam. Maybe there's a secret underground glacier. Maybe someone smuggled this in on a divine jet-powered camel. But no, it turns out this is just technology. Ancient, ingenious, and so boringly effective that it still works today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're listening. It's always fun seeing where you all are drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge forward through a swath of flat land outside an ancient Persian city, let's say somewhere near Yazd. The terrain is hard-packed and pale, like someone tried to bake a crust over the entire earth. In the distance, you spot a bizarre shape, half dome, half cone, like someone tried to bury a giant beehive upside down. You walk toward it, half curious, half desperate for shade. What you're approaching is a yakchal, though no one's used that word aloud yet. These bulbous structures rise above the horizon like sandstone UFOs. And here's the wild part, they're cold inside. Like, really cold. You duck through the low doorway, and the temperature drops 15 degrees instantly. It smells earthy, clean, and just slightly sweet. You hear dripping, soft, precise. Somewhere nearby, blocks of ice sit in silence, wrapped in cloth or stacked like treasure. This place doesn't feel like storage, it feels like a temple to coldness itself. And that's not far from the truth. Historians still argue whether these ancient Persian ice houses were simply practical inventions or if they held ceremonial or even spiritual importance. After all, you don't build something this labor-intensive just to keep your melon cool. Or maybe you do. Melon is very important when it's 47 degrees Celsius outside. But let's take a step back, because you, dear listener, are likely wondering the same thing everyone does. How did they get ice here in the first place? See, in the winter months, Persian nights could drop well below freezing. Doesn't seem likely, but desert climates are dramatic like that. People figured out that if you dug shallow channels, like wide stone pans, and filled them with water, the freezing night air would do the rest. By morning, you'd have a thin sheet of ice. You'd break it into chunks, haul it over, and store it inside the yakchal before the sun made slush of your efforts. Not just any channel would do. These were carefully aligned to avoid direct sun, often placed near wind catchers, those tall, thin towers you'll spot rising from old Persian buildings, funneling cool breezes downward like a built-in fan system. These badgers could even pull air through the yakchal itself, helping keep things below ambient temperature. Energy-free refrigeration. Sorry, modern FAC engineers. The Achaemenids beat you to it. And the structure? It wasn't just some heap of mud. The dome shape wasn't decorative, it was aerodynamic. It let hot air rise and escape through vents while keeping cooler air trapped below. Walls over 2 meters thick, made from a special insulating mud mix that included ash, egg whites, and goat hair. No joke. Apparently goat hair doesn't just make nice rugs, it makes your ice not melt. There's a fringe theory, floated by a couple of historians with too much time and too little peer review, that yakchals doubled as cold libraries. Scrolls stored in clay jars alongside the ice, because hey, paper hates humidity. It's not widely accepted, but wouldn't that be nice? A library you visit when it's too hot to think? And while the outer desert may feel like an oven with no off switch, inside this dome you could sit, breathe, maybe even nap against a cool stone wall. Some yachtals even had benches carved into the interior. It's not a stretch to picture someone lounging with a fig and chilled drink, mentally patting themselves on the back for defeating nature with geometry and goat hair. As you step back outside, blinking in the sudden glare, you realize this wasn't some niche experiment. There were hundreds of these across ancient Persia. Some towns had 3 or 4. Rich cities funded entire ice districts. The actual building was a trade, an art, and, arguably, a municipal necessity. And just think, in the same era some people were struggling to boil water, others were figuring out how to make ice in the desert. And the most delightful part? No one patented it. No one slapped their name on it and demanded tribute. These were often communal. Some villagers would take turns maintaining the structure. Kids might help crack the ice. Grandparents told stories while everyone huddled around the seasonal miracle of the yachtal. There's something soothing about it all. You don't need air conditioning, plastic fans, or refrigerated trucks. Just clever angles, midnight frost, and people who paid very close attention to the way nature moved around them. And yet, no matter how many times you walk around this strange, sun-baked landscape, it still feels odd to think of ice as the main character. But it is. Tonight, you've wandered into its kingdom. You squint into the horizon, still blinking away the memory of that first burst of cool air from the yachtal. You're sweating again, of course. The sun wastes no time here. And as you walk, you realize something's nagging at you. How did these people get so much ice to begin with? It's not like they had snowstorms rolling in every week. The desert sky at night can drop below freezing, sure, but we're not talking Siberia here. It's dry, sharp cold. Blink and it's gone kind of cold. So how exactly did they produce enough ice, not just a tray's worth, to fill a storage dome the size of a silo? Well, let's paint the picture. You're in winter now. Picture a flat stretch of land just outside the village. The ground's been leveled like a giant baking tray. Men are walking barefoot through mud channels, their breath curling in the pre-dawn chill. The pools are shallow, only a few inches deep, and they stretch for meters. You can feel the chill just imagining it, even with your feet buried in desert dust. These shallow basins are where the ice forms. They're aligned east to west, long and thin, which minimizes sun exposure. Some are dug next to walls made of thick adobe, designed to cast long shadows over the surface. That way, even as the morning sun creeps in, the ice has a chance to stay solid long enough for harvest. And yes, they harvested it. With flat blades and wooden tools wrapped in leather, workers would gently break the ice into slabs. Kids helped carry it with tongs or on fabric slings. These people weren't playing with snow cones. This was cold gold. It had to be moved quickly, carefully, before the sun got any big ideas. Historians still argue whether the labor behind this was seasonal village effort or whether cities employed full-time ice workers. There are references in some older texts to Bafchin, literally, ice pickers. Were they a specific class? An underpaid guild? Or just whoever happened to draw the short straw that month? No one knows for sure. What's clear is this: making ice in the desert wasn't just clever. It was orchestrated. A quiet symphony of cold, humidity, and physics, conducted entirely by people with no modern tools and an incredible sense of timing. But here's the cheeky part. The system was so effective that some Persians didn't just wait for winter. They created special gardens to funnel cold air and moisture toward the ice fields. Mini wind catchers, trenches filled with crushed pottery for insulation, even small aqueducts feeding water into the pools at just the right trickle rate. It's all very eco-luxury spa meets don't let anything melt. And if you're wondering why anyone went through this much trouble, well, remember what life was like without refrigeration. No cool drinks. No food preservation. Just heat, flies, and despair. Now imagine your neighbor shows up with a bowl of rosewater ice. Suddenly, she's the queen of the neighborhood. But back to the process. Each night, water is poured into the pools just after sunset. By midnight, the temperature dips low enough for the freezing to begin. By dawn, there's a layer of ice maybe an inch thick. Break it up. Store it. Repeat. Every single night. Some nights, if the wind's right, you get double the yield. Other nights, nothing. Too much wind and the water evaporates. Not enough wind and it doesn't freeze. It's the most boring high-stakes gamble in history. Oh, and here's your quirky tidbit. Apparently, in certain villages, people whispered to the water. Yep, little chants, old words, like frost lullabies. It wasn't magic exactly, more like habit. You'd sing to the pools to invite the cold. Because if your grandmother did it, and her grandmother before her, who were you to argue? That's how the ice came, after all. There's also this fringe theory that some communities sacrifice small offerings beside the basins, like flower petals, salt, or coins, just to ensure a good freeze. Again, historians are split. Some call it superstition. Others? Pre-scientific climate insurance. But superstition or not, it was hard work. You're working in freezing night air, fingers raw, feet in cold mud. And then, just as you're done, you've got to run, get those blocks to the Yakchal before the sun undoes everything. It's not glamorous. It's not fast. But it works. And it worked for centuries. Some ancient documents refer to these ice harvests like they were harvests of wheat or dates, measured, taxed, stored, rationed. Entire towns planned meals and ceremonies around the promise of ice availability. Royal banquets were postponed because the Yakchal hadn't filled up enough yet. Ice meant refreshment, preservation, health, even medicine. Some healers believed chilled water cured fevers. Others said it caused them. You know how it goes. But imagine the trust. You start pouring water into desert basins in December, hoping to have enough ice to get you through July. It's like trying to save sunshine in a bottle. And yet, they did it. Now, you're starting to see the full picture. It's not just that they had ice. It's that they planned their year around it. Ice wasn't just a thing you used. It was a thing you worked for, respected, and stored with care. And somehow, through all the effort and mud and moonlight and cracked fingernails, these ancient Persians became masters of seasonal cold. And yes, they might chuckle at your modern fridge humming lazily in the corner. After all, you've never had to whisper to your water just to earn a glass of ice. Now that you've seen how the ice was made, slab by slab, night by night under a sky so clear you could probably count the stars, you're probably wondering how on earth it didn't all melt the moment the sun blinked over the mountains. That, dear listener, brings us to the Yakchal itself. You're walking toward one now, again, in daylight. From a distance, it looks almost like a misplaced volcano, or the top half of a jelly mold buried upside down in sand. The color is a soft, dusty beige, blending so seamlessly into the desert background that you might miss it unless someone pointed and said, "That's where the cold lives." The structure towers above you, some reached heights of over 20 meters. But don't be fooled. What you see above ground is only half the story. Below the surface, it plunges just as deep. You approach the thick walls, no, not thick. Massive. Nearly 2 meters in some places, built not from ordinary clay but from a specially formulated material called sarouj. This magical mud mix was a Persian engineering wonder, combining clay, lime, ash, sand, and sometimes even egg whites or goat hair. All stirred, slathered, and baked under the sun until it became as hard as modern concrete and just as effective at keeping temperatures consistent. Run your hand across the wall. It's cool. Not icy, but unmistakably cooler than the air. Sarouj is not just insulative, it's breathable. It keeps heat out, moisture in, and resists everything from fire to termites to casual earthquakes. Modern engineers still analyze it with raised eyebrows and grudging respect. And here's the neat part, the shape of the Yakchal wasn't just for show. That conical, domed silhouette you see? It's there for function. The slope helps with airflow. Hot air rises through a small vent at the top, while cooler air sinks and stays inside. It's convection, but the low-tech version. Think of it like a desert thermos, except made by people who probably never used a blueprint in their lives. Now, take a step inside. The air hits you like a spell. It's cooler, quieter. Your footsteps echo faintly on the packed earth floor. The light filters in from a few high slits and one low doorway, creating long shadows and a sense that time stopped. Some Yakchals had spiral staircases carved along the inside, leading to different storage levels. Others were simple bowls, ice stacked in layers, separated by straw or cloth. The coldest ice was placed at the bottom, closest to the Earth's natural insulation. Warmer items, like chilled water jars or sherbet mixtures, stayed closer to the top. Here's a fun tidbit: some of the Yakchals were even divided into temperature zones. Not with signs or gauges, of course, but with instinct. The most experienced workers could tell, by the way condensation gathered on the wall or how fast a candle flickered, exactly where to put each load. And when it came to maintenance, these weren't just ice boxes you forgot until summer. The Yakchal was alive. You had to sweep it, monitor airflow, patch cracks with fresh sarouge, and keep out pests, both the crawling kind and the two-legged variety. Which brings us to one scholarly rabbit hole that's still argued over. Were these purely utilitarian, or also spiritual spaces? Some records suggest festivals around the first harvest of ice. Others hint that the cold interior was associated with purity or preservation, not just of food, but of the soul. A few domes were found with inscriptions, floral symbols, or geometric patterns etched into the walls. Not decoration. Not graffiti. Something closer to reverence. And maybe that's fair. Because when you step into this ancient fridge, you don't feel like you're just storing ice. You feel like you're protecting it. As if the cold were something holy, delicate, almost mythic. A creature that had to be soothed, swaddled, and left to sleep. Remember the phrase Yakchal literally means ice pit. But when you're inside one, crouching near the oldest, deepest layers of ice, you can't help but feel like you're in a vault, one built not to hide treasure, but to share it with the sunniest, sweatiest civilization imaginable. Oh, and yes, some Yakchals did have guards. Or at least, caretakers. Especially in summer. You didn't want someone sneaking in and grabbing a block of ice like it was a casual treat. There were even stories, half legend, half warning, of people who tried to steal from a Yakchal and were cursed to wander the desert forever, sweaty and unquenched. The more rational among us suggest that punishment was probably just being chased with a stick. Still, the moral held up. It's worth noting that not all Yakchals were public. Some were funded by royal families, private merchants, or high-ranking officials. In these cases, the interiors could be elaborate. Multi-chambered, painted, or even perfumed. Yes, perfumed. You haven't lived until you've imagined sitting in a 6th century air-conditioned mud dome that smells faintly of jasmine and date syrup. There's a reason these structures have lasted so long. Many still stand today, their mud plaster skins a little cracked, their insides long emptied, but their shadows stubbornly cool. They've outlasted empires, invasions, revolutions, and, most impressively, modern refrigerators. You run your fingers along the interior once more before stepping out again into the heat. The Yakchal looms behind you are silent, ancient, enduring. And you wonder, is it possible that something so boring, so simple and slow, might actually be smarter than everything we've built since? Because it doesn't beep. It doesn't break down. It doesn't need a battery. And it never asks for an update. Just thick walls, a little physics, and the patience to build something that works with nature, not against it. You're starting to appreciate just how much of ancient Persian life revolved around the rhythms of the sky, the land, and the cold. But now we're moving from the icy inner sanctum of the Yakchal to the open, star-drenched nights when that ice was first born. Tonight, you're not a visitor, you're a worker. A member of the ice-making crew. It's late. The sun has dipped behind the Zagros mountains, and the oppressive heat has finally relented. The desert cools fast. The sky turns a velvet black, pricked with more stars than you've ever seen. It's so quiet you can hear the crunch of your own sandals on the packed earth. You walk toward the ice fields, a grid of shallow channels dug into the dirt, lined with stone or hard clay. They look like someone's laid out baking pans on an epic scale. But these aren't for cookies. These are for catching the night's cold breath. The water arrives through a system of small canals, or canats. Ingenious underground aqueducts, sometimes running for miles, draw water from mountain springs, keeping it cool and protected from evaporation. It bubbles gently into each channel, forming a shallow, calm surface no deeper than a sheet of paper. And then, you wait. That's the whole job. Waiting. Watching. Listening. You sit with the other workers, young and old, men and women wrapped in cloaks against the chill. Someone brings out a tiny charcoal brazier. Someone else unwraps dried apricots and almonds from a cloth. The older folks mutter weather predictions. The younger ones poke the water to see if it's starting to crust over. And yes, there's singing again. Soft, rhythmic, half lullaby, half chant. Not to entertain. Not even really to be heard. Just something in the air, as if keeping the water company. A melody so old it doesn't even have words anymore. There's a fringe theory, still debated among academics, that this nighttime gathering was more than just labor. Some believe it was a kind of ritual. An act of communion with the elements. After all, not everyone could see the frost forming. Some swore they could feel it before it even happened. One account from a 9th century travel journal even claims a blind man was once the ice master of his village, simply by listening to how the wind shifted and the silence changed. Again, who knows? But it's a poetic thought. By midnight, the water starts to stiffen. You run your fingers lightly along the surface and feel resistance. The ice has come. It starts thin. Delicate enough to shatter with a breath. But hour by hour, it thickens. Not everywhere, just where the shadow holds longest. Workers tiptoe between the channels, checking, marking, measuring with fingers, eyes, and instinct. Just before dawn, it's time to act. You grab a wooden blade, broad, flat, slightly curved, and begin sliding it beneath the sheet of ice. A clean, lifting motion. Someone else catches it with a sling made of woven palm fibers. Another person carries it toward the yachtchel, wrapped quickly in cloth. It's like handling treasure. One slip, one stumble, and it's gone. And you do it over and over. Until the sun begins its slow creep back over the hills. The last few loads are rushed, some even melt a little in your hands. Your fingertips sting from the cold. Your back aches from crouching. But you keep going. Because once the sun rises, it's over. You can't fight heat with effort. Only with timing. And this is the part no one talks about, the heartbreak of a bad night. Maybe the air didn't drop far enough. Maybe the wind was too strong and carried the cold away. Maybe someone forgot to clean the channels, and the dirt interfered with the freezing. You show up in the morning and find nothing but puddles, and people too tired to speak. But when it works, when the ice comes, thick and smooth and clean, it's like a gift. Not from a god or a king, but from the planet itself. You harvested winter from the air. You shaped cold out of nothing. And then you stored it away. That's the rhythm. Night after night. Week after week. Until the yachtchel is full. And yes, ice making was seasonal, but it wasn't exactly restful. When the yachtchel filled, then came the maintenance. When the harvest ended, the delivery season began. No part of the year was idle. But those nights, the quiet ones, under the stars, were something special. The kind of slow, shared labor that bound communities. Everyone was needed. Everyone had a role. Even the kids, who'd be sent out at first light to chase away curious animals, foxes, goats, once even a donkey that got stuck in the channel and had to be bribed out with pomegranate peel. And here's your fringe fact, in some regions, they floated lotus petals on the water as a freezing test. If the petals froze flat, the air was cold enough. If they curled or tilted, it wasn't worth starting. Science? Not quite. but it worked often enough to pass as wisdom. Historians still argue whether this practice spread organically across villages or if it was taught, handed down like a trade secret. Some think ice-making families intermarried across regions, forming a kind of cold-keeping guild. Others suggest it just made sense to anyone who paid close attention to dew and shadow. You lean back now, tired but satisfied. The last load of ice has made it inside the dome. The sun's rising again. You've beaten it. For now. The fields glisten with the thin film of melt, ready to be dried and refilled that night. And you? You go home with your cloak damp, your fingers sore, and your mind humming with starlight and frost. You sleep through the heat of the day, curled under a cotton sheet in a low, mud brick house that somehow manages to stay just a little cooler than the outside world. But don't get too comfortable, we're heading back out soon. Not for ice making this time, but for a closer look at what makes the actual work. Because yes, you've already been inside one, and you've seen the ice pits and the dome, but now it's time to appreciate the finer details. The kind of stuff that turns pile of mud into desert-defying refrigeration unit. You start with the slope. Walk around the structure and look at its base. It's not flat. The actual is often built on a subtle incline, either by natural terrain or on purpose. This isn't an accident. It helps with two things, runoff and airflow. Remember, even the best insulation can't prevent some melt. That water needs somewhere to go, and if it pools at the base, you've got a swamp. But with a slight tilt and a clever drainage trench, the meltwater is guided away, sometimes even reused for irrigation or cooling nearby storage areas. Waste not, want not, even in ancient desert architecture. Then there's the entrance, low, narrow, and always on the shadiest side. That's not just to keep the heat out. It's to control the airflow, to create a sort of pressure lock. Step inside too quickly and you'll feel it, a gentle resistance, like the dome is breathing. Above, the vent at the apex, the chimney, basically, draws hot air up and out. In the hottest months, workers would even dampen cloths and hang them near the entrance to cool incoming air further. Air conditioning, 6th century edition. Now, about that dome shape. It's not just aesthetic. It creates a natural convection cycle. Warm air rises, cold air sinks. You felt this in your kitchen when you stand near the oven. Now imagine that, but flipped and controlled. The thick walls are lined with sarouge, the miracle mud mix we touched on earlier. Let's take a closer look at that. Sarouge isn't something you casually whip up with a stick. It's made with a precise ratio of clay, lime, fine ash, sand, sometimes even pulverized brick or crushed ceramics, and yes, as wild as it sounds, organic binders like egg whites or goat hair. This gives it flexibility, durability, and insulation. There are still villages in Iran where elders can feel the mix in their fingers and tell you if it's too hot, too dry, or too impatient. One legend even says a master builder once rejected a batch of sarouge because he claimed he could hear it sighing too fast. What that means, no one knows. But that batch apparently cracked within a year. The fact that some yachtals still stand after over a millennium? That's sarouge doing its job. No cement trucks. No rebar. Just mud, ash, and know-how. Walk a little further around the dome and you might notice something curious, faint vertical ridges or lines on the outside, like someone dragged their fingers down the wall while the mud was still wet. These aren't for decoration. They help rain, or rare desert dew, run off evenly. Preventing pooling. Preventing erosion. Now, let's talk dimensions. A yachtal isn't just tall, it's deep. The interior pit can plunge several meters below ground. Why? Because the lower you go, the more stable the temperature. That ice you store at the bottom? It's practically hibernating. The cold from the ground meets the cold from the ice above and just sort of cancels time. Historians still argue whether these below-ground portions were inspired by pre-existing burial architecture. After all, Persians were already digging earth tombs and fire pits long before ice storage was a thing. Some believe the shape of the yachtal mimics that of an inverted ziggurat, like a temple to cold instead of fire. Now imagine building one. You don't just slap up some bricks. First, you dig. Then you shape the base, layer by layer, working your way upward. Each section must be left to dry, harden, and settle before the next goes on. It could take a year. Maybe 2. And once it's built, it's not done. It needs a caretaker. A guardian of frost. Here's a quirky bit: in some towns, that role passed down through families. The yak bin, or ice keeper, was seen as both technician and steward. He, sometimes she, was responsible not just for maintaining the dome, but for regulating ice access. Weddings? Sure. Funerals? Of course. A random Tuesday? That depends. How hot is it? You needed permission. There were ledgers. One scratched into wood, one into memory. And don't even think about using the good ice to cool your bath. That's what the runoff channel was for. Some households placed clay jars in its path to catch the chilled water, perfect for washing faces, making tea, or just pretending you lived in a palace. There's even record of a woman in 14th century Shiraz who supposedly refused marriage proposals unless her suitor brought her a block of summer ice wrapped in silk. Spoiler, someone did. Twice. She married the second one. The more you learn, the more these structures feel like time travelers, relics of a slower, more deliberate world. A world where heat was patient, cold was earned, and everything had to be built to last. And there you are now, standing beside a yakchal at high noon, watching the sunlight bend across its curves. There's not a cloud in sight. The air is dry enough to crack a spoon. But inside that dome? It's still winter. By now, you're well acquainted with the physical marvel of the yakchal, the dome, the pit, the mud that defies the sun. But here's where things get a little more philosophical. Because for the ancient Persians, the yakchal wasn't just a tool. It was a place. A shared space. And, perhaps, something closer to sacred. You walk through a village square, barefoot on warm stones, just as the evening call to rest echoes faintly over distant rooftops. The yakchal stands at the edge of the plaza like a silent elder, and everyone knows it's there. But what it means to them? That depends who you ask. Some folks will tell you it's a storage place, plain and simple. Others lower their voices, tell you their grandmother said you shouldn't speak loudly near it, or that the first ice each year has to be blessed before it can be used in tea. Not formally, of course. Just with a breath, a touch, a pause. A whisper to the frost. Historians still argue whether this reverence was spiritual or simply cultural memory turned ritual. There are no holy texts about yakchals. No priests assigned to maintain them. And yet, their role in the emotional geography of the town is undeniable. Let's take a little stroll through time. Imagine you're in the 11th century. The Silk Road bustles to the north. The Mongols haven't arrived yet. You're a merchant, tired, dusty, rich in walnuts. You arrive at a village where the only shaded building is that curious dome outside the walls. You ask if it's a shrine. The local elder says, it's where we keep winter. And she's not kidding. She leads you inside, barefoot, respectful. You bow your head instinctively. The chill takes your breath in the best way. She unwraps a clay bowl, filled with slivers of ice, some kind of syrup, perhaps mulberry or tamarind. You drink, slowly. It tastes like stillness. Later, as you sleep on your rug under the stars, you dream of that bowl. The sweetness. The silence. And when you leave the next morning, you mention it to another traveler. They have a dome there, you say. A dome that holds the cold. Word spreads. The yakchal becomes legend. Back in the real world, our world, archaeologists have uncovered examples of yakchals with unexpected architectural flourishes. In one village, the interior dome bore a faintly painted crescent. In another, niches shaped like lotus petals. Decorative? Symbolic? Or was it just that the builders couldn't resist giving their creation a little soul? Here's your fringe tidbit for tonight. In at least 2 ancient towns, oral histories tell of yachtals being used not just for ice, but for preserving people, specifically, honored elders who had died during the summer. Their bodies were wrapped, cooled, and kept until the autumn, when proper funerals could be held. Again, scholars debate the truth of this. It's not widely corroborated. But the story endures. And whether it's folklore or fact, it adds a fascinating layer to the meaning of preservation. And it explains why, in some regions, people removed their shoes before entering a yachtal. Why they bowed their heads. Why children were shushed in its presence. It wasn't just a building. It was the keeper of time. And time, in the desert, is a precious thing. It's easy to forget how dangerous heat can be when you have air conditioning, running water, a fridge humming quietly in the kitchen. But in the ancient Persian world, heat meant decay, rot, spoilage, fever. It wasn't just uncomfortable, it was a slow, sticky threat. The yachtal was the antidote. A place where you could go and remember what winter tasted like. Where food could last longer. Where medicines could remain potent. Where you could pause, close your eyes, and cool down, in every sense. Some towns even used the yachtal as a meeting place during droughts. Not officially, no council chairs or sermons. But people would drift there during the worst weeks of heat. Sit in the shade. Share the cold. Talk. Hope. In one village account, during a particularly brutal summer in the 14th century, townspeople rationed the ice down to the sliver. Every family was allowed 1 shard per day. Children would carry them home in cloth wrappings, like holding a sacred letter. And no one used it without sharing. You begin to see, now, how this all connects. How something as unassuming as an ice house could become the beating heart of a town. Not because it was luxurious, but because it was kind. The Persians didn't invent refrigeration for profit or conquest. They did it because they understood something deeply human, that relief, however temporary, is something worth building for. And so, the yachtal stood, year after year, dome after dome, not as a fortress, not as a temple, but as a promise that even in the most unbearable conditions, there would always be a place to breathe. You sit now beside one such dome, evening settling again, stars blinking into place. Somewhere, a breeze catches in a wind tower. The sand cools beneath your feet. You press your hand to the side of the wall, and it's still cold. After all these years, it remembers. It's one thing to make ice and build structures that keep it cool. But what happens once that ice is actually needed? Once the high sun hits its peak, and someone says, "All right, time to send the chill into town." That's where the real fun begins. Because now, we're talking logistics. In the middle of a desert. With no wheels. No paved roads. No ice trucks humming along a highway. Just donkeys, ropes, and people very determined not to let the sun win. You're waking before dawn again. Not to make ice this time, but to move it. Today, you're one of the ice haulers. You stand at the edge of the yachtal, blinking in the grey morning light. A crew is already assembled. Thin men with long arms and linen wraps around their heads. One of them stretches out his back and murmurs something about yesterday's run being one slosh from disaster. Nearby, a pair of donkeys flick their tails lazily, utterly unaware that they're about to carry a precious load through a heat wave. First, the ice is pulled from deep storage. The best pieces, thicker slabs, smooth and relatively uniform, are chosen. These are wrapped in straw or wool, then bundled tightly in reed mats. More than insulation, these layers help absorb any early melt, keeping the outer cloth dry. Then come the packing rituals. Yes, rituals. Because balancing ice on a donkey? That's not just tie it down and go. It's geometry, experience, and occasionally, superstition. One man swears that if you knot the left rope first, it melts slower. Another insists the cargo should never face east. The morning sun is hungrier, he says. You don't argue. You just watch as they loop ropes with surgeon-level precision, padding the loads with bundles of hay to absorb shocks. The destination is the village, maybe half a day's walk. If you move fast and stay ahead of the sun, you might arrive with only a little melt. Maybe even a full block intact. If not, you'll be delivering an oddly cold puddle with apologies. You head out, the caravan bobbing gently down the path. The donkeys trudge, unfazed. You, on the other hand, are acutely aware of the temperature rising minute by minute. And the stakes are higher than they seem. This ice isn't for fun. It's been requested by the local apothecary, who needs it for preserving rosewater extractions. The village midwife asked for some to treat a child's fever. And there's a wedding, always a wedding, where someone insists on chilled melon slices for the guests. You pass hills, scrub brush, the occasional half-collapsed watchtower. The sun climbs. The road turns dusty gold. One of the donkeys tries to veer off toward a fig tree. You redirect him with a gentle tug, whispering something about honor and sorbet. Along the way, there are small pauses. Shade under rock outcroppings. Streams where the animals drink. You check the bundles. Still cool. A bit damp. One of the younger haulers presses his palm to the cloth, then holds it to his cheek with a sigh. This is the part most people forget. Ice wasn't just precious because it was rare. It was precious because it moved slowly. Everything about it, making it, storing it, carrying it, required care. You couldn't rush it. You couldn't throw it in a bag and hope for the best. It was the diva of commodities. And here's your historical fact, these deliveries weren't just local. In some regions, ice was transported up to 100 kilometers. Yes, 100. Entire camel caravans were outfitted with specialized crates. Some traders lined the interiors with crushed charcoal or even packed snow from higher elevations to extend the cold. In at least one record from the Sassanid era, an account details ice being sent from a mountain yakshal to a coastal palace over 3 days, arriving still crisp and noble, like a slab of sky. Of course, that's poetic language. It probably arrived a bit drippy. But the idea was there. And so was the effort. Now, you're reaching the village. The sun is high, but not yet cruel. Kids run ahead to greet the caravan, hoping for a chip of ice to suck on. A woman meets you at the entrance with a copper basin, ready to portion the delivery. You untie the bundles carefully. The hay is soaked but the core is firm. The apothecary beams. The midwife nods once, then hurries off. The bride's cousin claps like you've delivered gold coins. And maybe you have. There's a quirky footnote to all this. In some towns, ice delivery men were given honorary titles during summer. Little ones. Like bringer of cloud or cold carrier. Sometimes kids would chant these titles as they walked past. Not in mockery, in admiration. After all, who else could tame the sun? You sit in the shade now, drinking mint tea laced with a flake of your own cargo. It melts instantly. But you smile. The journey was successful. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. There's something meditative about it. The pace. The focus. The quiet understanding that sometimes, the smallest comforts, delivered slowly, thoughtfully, mean the most. You glance over at your donkey, who is now trying to eat someone's sandal. He's earned it. You've made the deliveries, dodged the sun, and earned your moment of shade. But today, we're going somewhere sweeter, literally. You're no longer hauling ice, you're tasting it. Because while yakshals were built for preservation and survival, they also had another, more luxurious side, dessert. You find yourself in the courtyard of a wealthy merchant's home. Think broad stone floors, tall clay jars, and soft cushions arranged under a reed canopy. The air smells faintly of rosewater and grilled lamb. But what everyone is waiting for, what has the whole household in quiet anticipation, is the sherbet. No, not the neon stuff from modern freezers. This is ancient Persian sherbet, a chilled, fragrant drink made with flower waters, fruit syrups, spices, and yes, ice from the yakshal. You watch the steward arrive with a wide silver tray, on which sit several delicate ceramic cups. The liquid inside is pale pink, dotted with slivers of mint and thin curls of citrus rind. A bit of frost clings to the rim. The effect is elegant and impossibly refreshing. You sip. And for a moment, the heat forgets you. Saffron, rosewater, maybe a touch of sour cherry. Sweetened with grape must or honey. It's floral without being cloying, delicate yet assertive. The kind of drink you sip slowly not because of etiquette, but because you want it to last forever. Here's a fun fact: Persian cuisine was among the first in the world to combine ice and aromatics in such an artful way. While the Chinese had iced teas and the Romans dabbled in wine slush, the Persians elevated the concept into an occasion. Historians agree that by the 5th century, flavored ices, not just drinks, but semi-frozen treats, were being served at noble gatherings. These were made by crushing stored ice into snow-like piles and mixing it with fruit purees, flower extracts, even spices like cardamom or ground pistachio. You look across the courtyard and spot a young servant fanning a shallow copper bowl filled with pomegranate ice. It glows like a ruby in the afternoon light. And that's not just for aesthetics. These bowls were often hand-spun to give the mixture a better chill. Some were pre-frozen to help keep the sherbet from melting too quickly during service. You could say this was early performance dessert. There's even a fringe theory, still debated, naturally, that the concept of ice cream as we know it began not in Italy or France, but in the Persian plateau. The ancient treat called bastani sunnoti, which included frozen milk, rosewater, saffron, and salep, orchid root starch, was served as early as the Achaemenid era. It was thick, stretchy, chewy, and sweet. A dessert that didn't just melt but unfolded. One traveler from Central Asia wrote that eating Persian ice cream was like chewing a snowflake wrapped in perfume. That traveler was probably poetic and a little bit dehydrated, but still, it left an impression. You step into the kitchen next, following the scent of lemon rind and chilled clay. A cook is stirring a large pot of syrup, preparing it for tomorrow's batch. She explains that some recipes are kept secret, passed down through families. You can taste who made it, she says, smiling. Each one is different. And ice wasn't just for drinks or desserts. It was used to set dishes, harden sauces, cool cooked rice for certain dishes requiring temperature contrast. Some recipes required alternating between hot and cold 3 times before serving. The result? Complex textures, balanced flavors, and a sense that your palate just traveled through the seasons. Imagine sitting in that courtyard as a summer guest, handed a bowl of saffron ice. You wouldn't just be refreshed, you'd be amazed. Not because it's cold, but because it's alive with care. And that brings us to the most delightful detail, ice etiquette. In higher circles, how you served ice, and to whom, it mattered. You didn't serve sherbet to a guest with a cracked cup. You didn't offer it too early or too late in the meal. The order of fruit flavors mattered, too. Tart came before sweet. Rose before citrus. Pomegranate before honey. Oh, and you never let the ice clink. The idea was to create a feeling of ease, not disruption. Even luxury had rules. You watch now as a group of children giggle behind a curtain, sneaking mouthfuls of melon snow, ice shaved over chunks of ripe fruit. A grandmother catches them, scolds them lightly, then hands them each a second helping. Don't waste it, she says. The ice was born at night. And that's what it feels like. That this food, this refreshment, carries the memory of stars and moonlight. It's not just dessert. It's time, chilled and spooned out with care. You lean back on your cushion, sherbet in hand, and marvel again at how something as fleeting as a cube of ice could inspire so much effort, tradition, and taste. And then someone brings out the candied violets. Because of course they do. The taste of saffron still lingers on your tongue as you leave the courtyard, passing beneath low archways and dusty fig trees. But now, we head back toward the public spaces, the beating heart of the community. Because while ice in noble homes was exquisite, perhaps even a little extravagant, its role among everyday folks was something far deeper. You follow a narrow stone path winding through a modest village nestled against a rocky hill. The sun is relentless, and the walls of the homes seem to shimmer. But there, in the center of it all, stands the local communal yakchal. No grand archway. No servants with silver trays. Just a squat, thick-walled dome with a single wooden door, scarred, sun-faded, and warm to the touch. Yet inside, it's the same sweet chill you've grown used to. This one might be smaller, yes, but it's no less essential. Here, the ice isn't reserved for sherbet or royal tea. It's for preservation, healing, and sheer survival. Step inside, and you'll see clay jars stacked against the walls, filled with soaked barley, lentils, or goat's milk sealed in cloth. In the center, wrapped in worn linen, lie the remaining blocks of ice, small now, nearing the end of summer. Beside you, two elderly women argue gently over how much should be taken for a child with a fever. A boy waits quietly with an empty jug. A baker peeks in to see if any ice is left for tomorrow's early batch of dough. This is what the yakchal was truly made for, not luxury, but sharing. And this is where our favorite contradiction comes into play. Ice, so temporary, so delicate, becomes the most democratic of commodities. At least in principle. Historians still argue whether these communal yakchals were truly open access or managed by councils and headmen. Some towns had formal rationing systems. Others relied on informal trust and tradition. But nearly all villages had a rule: you take only what you need, and you leave enough for others. That rule wasn't written on any wall. It didn't need to be. It was woven into the rhythm of life. Here's your quirky tidbit for today. In some villages, especially during droughts, a bell would be hung just outside the yakchal door. Anyone who needed ice would ring once. A steward or elder would answer. But if someone rang twice? That meant emergency, usually a birth, or illness, or sudden grief. People would run. Ice would be gathered. No one ever questioned it. You walk through the village now, listening to the sounds of daily life. A potter hums over her wheel. A goat bleats lazily in the distance. And yet, everyone glances now and then toward the dome. Because it anchors them. Not just physically, but emotionally. You pass a small shop front where a man is pouring cool water over a cloth-covered urn. Inside is yogurt, meant to thicken slowly in the shade. He grins when he sees you. Want to try something better than any prince's feast, he says, lifting a chilled clay cup. It's tart, creamy, and impossibly refreshing. And again, it's cold. Cold because of the yakchal. Further down, a midwife is preparing compresses soaked in mint and ice water for a new mother. A scholar scribbles notes beside a dish of chilled ink. A merchant lifts a handkerchief filled with salted apricot slush. Each use of the ice is small, personal, even forgettable. But together? They form the web of a society shaped by slowness, by attentiveness, by the careful sharing of what couldn't be hoarded for long. There's something almost subversive about that. In a world where most resources favor the rich, ice became, briefly, beautifully, something that leveled people. You could be poor and still have cold water on the hottest day. You could be sick and receive relief without payment. You could be old, tired, grieving, and still find a quiet place to cool your forehead and breathe. Of course, not every village was perfect. Theft happened. Greed slipped in. One tale tells of a man who snuck into the yakchal at night and hid ice beneath his robes, only to be found in the morning soaked and shivering in his sleep. Children made up songs about him. Stole the frost, forgot the cost. Harsh? Maybe. But effective. The point wasn't just to punish. It was to remind. Ice doesn't last. Hoard it, and it turns to nothing. Share it, and it spreads. And so the yakchal stood not only as a feat of architecture but as a quiet moral teacher. Not through rules, but through example. You find yourself back inside now, the last light of day fading outside. The dome breathes quietly around you. A girl giggles as her grandfather places a sliver of ice on the back of her neck. She squeals, then clutches it with both hands, as if she's holding a pearl. she's not thinking about engineering or history. She's just grateful. And you? You realize that in this age-old structure, in this practice passed down through centuries, there's something deeply comforting. It's not just the cool air. It's the proof that people once built things not for power or glory, but for each other. You rise early again, this time not to harvest or deliver ice, but to protect it. Because believe it or not, keeping a yachtule running isn't just about physics and patience. Sometimes, it's about defense. Because once you've spent months harvesting night frost, layering it neatly, and guarding it through blistering days, you start to realize that the biggest threats aren't just heat and time. No, the enemies of ice are far more varied, and occasionally ridiculous. You're standing outside the yachtule at dawn, broom in hand. Not exactly glamorous, but necessary. Dust settles on everything overnight. And where dust goes, ants follow. Where ants go, mice show up. And where mice go, well, let's just say you don't want to open your ice dome and find a warm, snoring intruder wrapped in your best linen. Today, however, your first problem is peacocks. Yes. Peacocks. They're not native to Persia, exactly, but traders brought them from India, and some wealthy families kept them as pets. Beautiful creatures. Loud, entitled, and completely obsessed with anything cool. You spot one now, strutting dangerously close to the shaded side of the yachtule. Head tilted. Eyes locked on the vent opening like it's a personal invitation. You wave your broom. It ignores you. Peacocks do not fear brooms. They fear nothing. Eventually, you toss a fig in the opposite direction and it sachets off with all the grace of a royal in exile. But that's only the start. As summer wears on, other enemies emerge. First, fire. Not arson, just accident. In a nearby town, someone once set a cooking fire too close to a yachtule. The wind caught it. Mud cracked, insulation failed, and before nightfall, weeks of ice had turned into a puddle with a smell that could only be described as regret. So each village posted rules. No fires within 20 paces. No metal pots on the outer wall. No oil stored nearby. And absolutely, under no circumstances, should anyone try to use the dome as a tandoor. Yes, it happened. Once. Then there's theft, already touched on in whispers and legends, but let's go deeper. In hard summers, when food is scarce and water even scarcer, a slab of ice can seem like treasure. Some would try clever tricks, hiding chips in flour sacks or beneath folded rugs. Others less clever, like the man who simply tried to run with one under his arm. Spoiler, he didn't get far. Most villages didn't punish ice theft harshly. Usually a scolding, a day of public sweeping, or a demand to help with the next harvest. The real punishment was shame. Ice was communal. Taking too much was like stealing air. But the biggest danger? Structural collapse. Not dramatic, fiery explosions, but slow wear and tear. Wind eroding sarouge. Earthquakes cracking the base. Small leaks turning into mold. A neglected yachtule could become useless in just a season. And rebuilding? That wasn't quick. Or cheap. So some towns had rotating watchmen. Others formed cooling guilds, small groups trained in inspection and repair. These people weren't famous, but everyone knew their names. Without them, the whole system fell apart. Literally. There's a fringe theory, still debated, that some yachtles were outfitted with basic alarm systems. A hanging bell, a water drip that rang when temperatures rose too quickly, or tiny clay tiles that cracked at specific levels of humidity. Early warning signs. Maybe they worked. Maybe it was just the paranoia of too many melted summers. Either way, the idea shows just how seriously these communities took their cold. But sometimes, the danger didn't come from nature or neglect. Sometimes, it came from politics. A rival village upstream might block the canat feeding your basin. A tax collector might demand a levy on ice, claiming it was a luxury good. One record from the Safavid era tells of a town that burned their own yakchal in protest when the local governor tried to privatize ice access. Talk about a cold rebellion. Still, most threats were mundane: foxes digging at the walls, children sneaking inside to play hide-and-seek, or someone stacking too much grain too close and collapsing the support arch. Which is why every yakchal had its rules, not carved in stone, but passed through habit, repetition, and side-eyed reminders. No shouting near the dome. No sitting on the outer ledge. And definitely no storing pickled onions beside the ice. That last one may have been specific to a single village, but trust me, it's a good rule. Despite all this, most yakchals endured. Because people didn't just build them, they watched them. Repaired them. Defended them. Not with swords, but with care. And so you find yourself back at your post as the sun climbs. The peacock has returned, this time bringing a friend. A goat eyes the runoff channel like it's a personal buffet. You sigh. Wave your broom again. It's not glorious work. No parades. No poetry. But when you lean against the wall and feel that soft chill seep into your back, you remember why it matters. Because in a world built on sun and dust and time, the yakchal stands as proof that small protections make all the difference. And today? The ice is safe. The ice is safe, for now. But safety alone isn't enough. Eventually, that cold treasure must travel. And not just from village to village. We're talking bigger distances now. Days across the plateau. Down river valleys. Even across empires. And this, dear listener, is where the camels come in. You're no longer strolling through a sleepy village. You're on the edge of a vast desert trade route, somewhere near Kerman, or perhaps farther east near the edge of Bactria. The sun hangs heavy above you, and the horizon ripples with heat. But rising above the glare is a caravan. A long, lumbering procession of camels, donkeys, and men wrapped in long robes, their faces barely visible beneath cloth to guard against the wind. You step closer. And there, in the center of the train, are the ice crates. These aren't the soft-wrapped bundles you remember from donkey hauls. These are serious containers. Large, wood-framed, packed with straw, lined with animal hide, and sealed tightly with waxed cloth. Inside? Blocks of yakchal ice, sawed into manageable slabs, each stamped with the seal of the town it came from. No, really. Some cities mark their ice. A kind of cold currency. The deeper the stamp, the older the tradition. A caravan leader once joked that he'd accept stamped ice over silver any day. Silver melts when men get greedy, he said. Ice melts because it's meant to. The journey these ice blocks face is no joke. Several days over uneven terrain. Steep passes. Blistering dunes. Some camel trains even cross into modern-day Pakistan or Afghanistan. And yet, somehow, a portion of the ice survives. Historians still argue whether these long-distance deliveries were profitable or simply ceremonial. Some believe they were status symbols, gifts between courts, tributes to governors. Others point to ledgers showing actual trade, ice exchanged for spices, wine, even songbirds. There's even mention of ice markets. Yes. Markets. In certain cities, especially near larger rivers or trade hubs, ice would be auctioned off in small quantities. Caravans would arrive with crates, and merchants would bid, not just on size, but on how much had survived. It was like buying a bouquet of flowers that might wilt mid-transaction. One buyer reportedly stuck his hand into a sample crate, pulled out a single perfect cube, and kissed it. "My heart feels 20 years younger," he declared. Then he paid triple the asking price. But most impressive? The technology behind these transports. The crates were layered. Straw, then charcoal, then linen soaked in rosewater. Yes, again with the rosewater, Persians loved it. Then the ice, carefully spaced, never touching the wood. The crates were stored in the center of the camel procession to shield them from wind. Covered in cloth. Sprinkled occasionally with a fine mist to keep internal humidity balanced. And yes, someone rode with the crates. Always. An iceman. Part courier, part caretaker. He carried a hooked rod to shift the blocks if needed. He checked for leaks. He whispered curses at the sun when no one was looking. His job wasn't just delivery, it was escort. You might think camels wouldn't care about all this. But camels are smart. They know when they're carrying something different. One story tells of a lead camel refusing to move until the crate was rebalanced. Another of a camel turning away from the sun each time the train stopped, as if shielding the load with its own body. Quirky fact? In some regions, ice camels were decorated with special tassels, blue, white, or pale green, to ward off the evil eye. Or maybe just to remind everyone that this camel is chill. Now, you're riding beside the train. The sun is high. You're hot, yes, but you're part of something stranger than fiction. A moving miracle. A group of humans and animals marching heat across miles just to deliver cold. You stop in a desert outpost, just a few mud huts and a shady grove of palms. The crate is unsealed. The village elder steps forward. You all hold your breath. Still solid. Still glistening. A square of frozen water, born in winter, now alive in the heart of summer. It's passed around like relic. Children touch it with trembling fingers. An old man presses it to his chest. A mother slips a flake into her infant's palm. Nothing is wasted. The meltwater is caught, scented, offered to the oldest women first. The ice itself is shaved into cups, shared, dissolved on grateful tongues. And you realize, this wasn't about trade. It was about proof. Proof that people could do the impossible. Carry snow through fire. Move silence across chaos. Deliver calm through noise. By sunset, the crates are refilled, with fresh straw, sealed again, and the caravan moves on. You watch it disappear into the dusk, camel bells jingling faintly like wind chimes. And as the stars appear, you sit beneath a palm tree and sip a tiny cup of rose-chilled water. Still cold. Still here. You've walked with ice from its birth in moonlit basins to its slow, deliberate migration across empires. But now, let's turn our gaze outward, to the distant lands and stranger echoes of the Yakshal. Because as it turns out, Persia wasn't the only civilization trying to outsmart the sun. Far from it. While the Yakshal stands as one of the most enduring examples of passive refrigeration, other cultures, sometimes separated by mountains, sometimes by oceans, were experimenting with their own answers to the same burning question. How do you keep cold in a hot world? You begin in Morocco, somewhere in the Atlas Mountains. Here, among the Berber communities, a different kind of structure rises, the Agadir or Iguda. At first glance, it seems similar to a Yakshal, fortified, dome-like, often communal. But inside, it's more about storing grain, oil, or valuables. Yet some of these desert granaries also feature ice pits. Tiny ones. Shallow, circular depressions at the base, layered with straw and tightly sealed jars. Not designed for blocks, but for chips, collected from higher elevations and hauled down on donkeys. Historians still argue whether these were intended for cold storage or were accidental byproducts of food preservation systems. Some believe certain igudas were dual-purpose, storing not just calories, but comfort. From Morocco, we drift east to China during the Tang dynasty. You walk along the curved rooftops of Chang'an, the capital at its height, and descend into a stone-lined cellar. This is an ice well. These structures, called bingjian, were built beneath palaces and wealthy homes. In winter, workers would collect frozen river chunks, stack them in these underground chambers, and seal them with layers of straw and clay. Sound familiar? Some Chinese ice wells were sophisticated enough to have stone ramps and drainage channels. And just like in Persia, ice was used for food preservation, medicine, and elite indulgence. The emperor's court even had a dedicated ice office, complete with an official whose sole job was to distribute ice rations and ensure no one overchilled their duck stew. Now you're standing in Mesoamerica, where the Aztecs don't have winter rivers or snow-capped peaks in easy reach. But they have volcanoes. Specifically, the towering Popocatépetl and Iztaccíhuatl. Here's your quirky tidbit: messengers known as Tlaymail were sometimes tasked with ascending the mountains and retrieving small amounts of snow or ice to bring to the capital. Was it ritual? Was it culinary? Was it simply flexing imperial power? Historians disagree. But the fact remains, Aztec nobility knew what snow was. And they liked it. Of course, they didn't build yachtals. But the desire was the same. And now, farther west, to Japan. In the Edo period, certain lords constructed himuro-e ice houses. These were built in forested areas, shielded from direct sunlight, and lined with bark, straw, and snow packed into tight bricks. Not domes, but rectangular pits dug deep into hillsides. Winter snow was compacted, covered, and kept until summer. Used not just for preservation, but for making kakagiri, the beloved shaved ice dessert. One story from Kyoto tells of a festival where ice from the previous winter was brought out and served with plum syrup. The effect was electric. People gasped. Children laughed. Priests nodded in approval. And for one shining afternoon, the town was wrapped in borrowed winter. And finally, we wander into ancient India. In the highlands of Kashmir and parts of Himachal Pradesh, communities collected snow in shaded pits lined with stone. They didn't call them yachtals, but the idea was hauntingly familiar: store the winter to survive the summer. Some ancient Sanskrit texts mention cool chambers beneath temples, where ghee, milk, and flowers were kept cool during religious ceremonies. In some regions, underground cisterns were built not for water, but for holding snow, swept in from hillsides and packed with herbs to preserve its freshness. So was this global knowledge shared? Historians still argue about that. Some believe these ideas spread through trade routes, the Silk Road, the maritime spice routes, ancient empires whispering tricks to one another across generations. Others say it's just convergent evolution. Different people, same problem, same solution. And maybe both are true. Because while the materials vary, mud brick in Persia, stone in China, straw in Japan, the intention is identical. To make time hold still. To press pause on the seasons. To capture, however briefly, the cool breath of winter and carry it forward. You return now to your yachtal. But it feels different. Not isolated. Not unique. It feels like part of a global conversation, a silent one, held across centuries, across languages, across geography. Each culture answering the heat with its own quiet engineering, its own whisper of coolness. And when you step back inside the dome, familiar now, welcoming, you sense echoes from other places. Chinese ice wells. Japanese snow pits. Moroccan granaries. Even mountaintop messengers dragging snow down to monarchs. All of them, like this one, built not for luxury, but for relief. You've traveled across continents and centuries, tracing echoes of the yachtal in distant lands. But now it's time to face a different truth: even marvels like this can fade. Even the coolest structures eventually warm, crack, crumble. So now, you return to Persia, not to witness the glory of the ice house in its prime, but to walk through its waning days. You stand in a small town, maybe one you've visited before, and stare at what's left of the yachtal. The dome is still there, but the top has caved in. Weeds grow along the base. The door is gone, replaced by a pile of stones. You hear wind moving through cracks, but no cool breath follows. And still, it stands. A survivor. But also a ghost. The decline didn't come all at once. It never does. It began slowly, subtly, with the arrival of modern refrigeration, machines that hummed, cooled on demand, and didn't need stars or straw or sarouge. At first, only the cities had them. But cities influence villages. And machines influence minds. Why build something that takes a year when you can plug a box into the wall and have ice in minutes? Historians mark the fall of the yachtal as a byproduct of modernization, but in truth, it was a death by 1,000 conveniences. A little less need each year. A little less knowledge passed down. One builder didn't teach his son. One village didn't repair after a storm. One summer passed without ice, and no one quite noticed. Wars didn't help. During the many upheavals of the 19th and 20th centuries, colonial incursions, revolts, boundary shifts, many yachtals were abandoned, repurposed, or forgotten. Some were scavenged for building material. Others were mistaken for shrines, then destroyed. A few were lost under highways or rail lines, the future paving over the past with the smooth arrogance of progress. And yet, some still held on. One town in Yazd refused to tear theirs down, even when it hadn't been used in 50 years. Instead, they painted the dome each spring, cleared the brush, and told stories beside it. Children played around it. Tourists asked questions. Elders sat in the shade and nodded as if the thing were still working. And maybe it was. Just not the way it used to. There's something bittersweet about this stage in the yacht's life. It has moved from tool to memory. From engineering marvel to cultural relic. And with that change comes a strange kind of softness. People no longer scold children for playing near it. Instead, they tell them, "This is where your grandfather kept the snow." They say it with a grin. With nostalgia. With warmth. One quirky tidbit, in the 1970s, a university student tried to recreate a yachtl from scratch. No machines. Just bricks, straw, sarouge, and sweat. He failed miserably. His dome collapsed after a single season. But his notes became the foundation for modern preservation efforts. Because yes, today, a new kind of person has discovered the yachtl, the architect, the climate scientist, the sustainability nerd. Suddenly, this mud and goat hair relic isn't just a ruin, it's an inspiration. Scholars study the thermal dynamics. Builders examine the angles. Some even 3D scan the interiors to understand airflow. One French researcher called the yachtl the closest thing to a perfect passive cooling system. You walk now through a broken dome with a notebook in hand. You're not from this place. You wear modern shoes, carry a metal water bottle. But something about this ancient shell draws you in. You reach down. Touch the ground. It's still cool. You blink. Smile. Measure the shadow. Take notes. And slowly, quietly, start planning. Because the story isn't quite over. Not yet. But make no mistake, the yacht's fall wasn't just about machinery. It was about time. Changing rhythms. A world that got faster, louder, more impatient. Where once people waited days to build ice, they now scroll past anything slower than 10 seconds. Where once a village celebrated frost in August, now no one notices if their fridge is out of sync by 2 degrees. And yet, underneath it all, there's still a part of us that remembers. The feel of cold air in a hot place. The miracle of water turning to crystal under the stars. The silence of a dome holding its breath. You leave the ruin behind, walking back toward the center of town. Kids run past, chasing a ball. A shopkeeper waves from behind sacks of dried herbs. The world keeps moving. But behind you, in the dusty wind, the yachtl stands. Bent. Faded. Quiet. And utterly unforgettable. You've walked through the dust of forgotten domes, brushed fingers across the last breaths of cool air trapped in cracked earth. And just when it seemed the yacht's story had ended in silence and erosion, something shifts. Because now, a new generation is listening. You're seated in a modern conference room. The air is crisp, artificial, too eager to impress. There's a whiteboard at the front, a projector humming quietly, and a group of people leaning forward, engineers, urban planners, environmentalists. They aren't discussing ice cream brands or industrial refrigeration. They're talking about ancient Persian ice houses. Specifically, how to bring them back. And this isn't just historical curiosity. This is necessity. The planet is heating. Cities are choking on their own air. Energy grids are groaning. And suddenly, these odd domes from 1,500 years ago start looking very appealing. Because they don't need power. They don't hum, buzz, or break down. They're made from mud, water, ash, and time. They don't just cool, they cooperate with the environment. And that, today, is revolutionary. You flip through a modern architectural study. One page shows thermal diagrams. Another, digital airflow models. Then, photos. A group of students in Iran building a new yachtl by hand. Layer by layer. Just like before. They're not trying to recreate history. They're trying to solve the future. And here's your historical fact. In the early 2000s, a collaboration between Iranian architects and European environmentalists produced a working prototype, a new yachtl outside Tehran, designed to store food and water in rural communities with no access to electricity. It worked. Temperatures inside stayed 10 to 15 degrees Celsius cooler than the outside, even during peak summer. No wires. No machines. Just walls that remember the cold. From there, the idea spread. In India, similar domes are used to chill medicine in off-grid clinics. In Mali, versions made with local clay are tested for preserving vegetables. In the American Southwest, a group of desert permaculturists builds a yachtl-inspired dome to store seeds and herbal tinctures. The language changes. The names shift. But the idea, the heart of it, holds. Here's your quirky tidbit. One startup in California is currently testing a luxury passive fridge inspired by yachtl architecture. It's sleek, dome-shaped, and lined with repurposed volcanic ash and straw. They call it the Smurf Cooler. Yes, it costs more than your car. Yes, it's probably missing the point. But still, it's proof. Proof that the wisdom is coming back around, even if it has to wear modern branding to be heard. You close the book. Step outside. It's hot again, of course it is. But your mind feels cooler. Sharper. Like it's seen something hidden beneath the noise. And then you remember the other side of revival, not just buildings, but culture. You walk into a small community garden at the edge of town. At the center, a replica dome, small, handmade, painted in soft whites and ochres. Around it, families gather. Someone pours rose water over crushed ice. A child laughs as the vapor rises. An old woman dips a cloth into a jar of cool water and presses it to a child's neck. A young man hands out saffron sherbet in clay cups, topped with mint and tiny, edible flowers. They're not reenactors. They're neighbors. They're keeping something alive. You listen as a local teacher explains how the dome works. She speaks gently, like she's explaining a bedtime story. The heat rises. The cold sinks. The walls are thick like memory. She pauses. Smiles. People always think this was magic, she says. But it's just attention. That's all. We used to pay attention to wind, to shadow, to shape. That's how you stay cool. And suddenly, you realize, this revival isn't just technological. It's philosophical. A return to noticing. To slowing down. To working with nature, not against it. Because the yachtl doesn't just preserve ice. It preserves an idea. That the future can be gentle. You sit down beside the dome. The air inside isn't icy, but it's cool. The walls curve like a cocoon. No buttons. No blinking lights. Just silence, and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere deep in the earth. And for a moment, you forget the rush of the outside world. You remember the stars. The frost. The patience. You remember the people who whispered to water under the moonlight. And you smile. Because they whispered for us, too. Even now, as the sun dips behind the low hills and shadows stretch across the sand, the dome of the yachtl catches the last light in a way that feels deliberate. Like it's still standing tall, still holding its purpose, even if it's no longer filled with ice. You walk toward it slowly, listening to the hush of evening. The village behind you quiets, doors creak closed, a rooster grumbles himself to sleep, and somewhere, a child sings softly while stacking dried date pits into a tiny fort. This is your last visit to the Yakchal. And yet, it feels like the first. Because now, after all the nights under starlit basins, all the saffron sherbets, the peacocks and the donkey deliveries and the stories of faraway ice wells, you're not seeing it as a curiosity. You're seeing it as a listener. A witness to centuries. To whispered gratitude. To every hand that laid mud brick atop mud brick in perfect geometry. To every breath of cold air caught, kept, shared. It doesn't matter that it's empty today. Or that the nearest block of ice is humming inside a silver box in someone's modern kitchen. The soul of the Yakchal was never really in the ice. It was in the care. You press your palm to the wall again. It's rough, cool, familiar. Inside, it smells like old earth and dry straw. Maybe even a trace of sweetness in the dust, rosewater, from another century. You sit down on the inner step, where generations once rested in the morning stillness, after the ice was tucked away. The walls curve gently around you. Not to trap, but to hold. And you start to imagine the last ice harvest. Not hundreds of years ago, just decades. A group of workers in the pale chill of a January night. Footsteps crunching over frost. Hands numb, but sure. Children watching, wide-eyed, as the first slab is cracked and carried. Elders nodding from the shadows, murmuring the same blessings their elders once gave them. There's one final quirky tidbit here. Some say that when the last Yakchal in a town was sealed, people held a quiet gathering, not a funeral, not a festival, just a sitting. No talking. Just being. A moment to feel what had been lost. And what had been kept. Because even though the ice melted, always, it never disappeared. It became vapor. Cloud. Rain. River. And maybe, if you were lucky, it returned the next winter. To be caught again. Kept again. Shared again. That's the thing about cold. About quiet. About care. You can't own it. You can only offer it. And so, as the stars begin to emerge and the desert wind brushes past the dome like a slow exhale, you rise one more time. Step outside. Turn back. And you nod. The dome does not nod back. It does not shine or hum or sparkle. It simply remains. And that, in the end, is enough. Now that we've come to the end of tonight's journey, let's take one final breath together. Let your shoulders relax. Let your jaw unclench. There's no desert heat here anymore, no donkeys to load or channels to clear, no walls to smooth with goat hair plaster. Just the soft hush of a story settling into stillness. Picture the Yakchal in your mind, its soft curves, its gentle angles, the way it rose out of the sand like a promise. You're sitting beside it now, perhaps cross-legged in the dust, perhaps leaning quietly against its cool wall. The air around you isn't cold, exactly. Just quiet. Still. You can almost hear the breath of the wind slipping past the dome's vent, like a lullaby for the earth. Everything around you slows. The sky fades into deep indigo. The stars appear one by one, lazy, unhurried. You take a slow, easy breath. And another. And you let go. Let go of the hurry. Let go of the noise. Let go of the day. You are safe here. Cool here. Wrapped in a story that has no urgency, no alarms, no deadlines. Just people. Mud. Ice. Time. The dome may crumble. The ice may melt. But the care behind it, the whisper in the water, the rhythm of the frost, the shape of silence, stays with you. So close your eyes. Let it stay a little longer. Let it hold you. Good night.